Welcome to LabMinutes.com and our lab video series on Cisco ISE 3.0. This is Matha, your instructor for this video series. For a complete list of our ISE videos, you can visit our website under the security section. There you can also sign up for our newsletters to receive the latest video updates. At this point, from what we've learned in the last video, you should have already picked a deployment type as well as the appliance model. If you are going with the physical appliances, whether they are 3615, 55, or 95, you can just order them with the ISE version that you want and you should be good to go then. But if you decide to use the virtual appliance, then you would need to make sure that the VMs are sized properly, and you also need to still perform the installation of the VM. So in this video, we are going to go through an installation of Cisco ISE virtual machine on VMware ESXi. While we let the installation running, we will spend some time covering the topic of ISE licensing, which is always fun. As you know, ISE comes with tons of capabilities, but some of those capabilities cannot be enabled unless you have the proper licenses installed. This will help you understand the ISE licensing model, so you know which type of the license to purchase for the features that you need. When it comes to sizing your ISE VM, you basically just matched the VM resources to those of the physical appliance model that you chose in your deployment design. As of ISE version 9.3, I believe Cisco provided an OVA file that has all the hardware resources predefined to eliminate the problem with the insufficient resources allocation, and this includes the CPU, memory, and even disk space. There are actually multiple OVA files with different disk space, as the monitoring node requires usually more disk space than the other, and you just need to know how to pick the right one, and we will see this in a little bit. First, let's take a look at the VM requirements that you can anticipate from an ISE VM. I'm going to bring up a Cisco document right here, which is a Cisco ISE 3.0 installation and upgrade guide. And there's a section right here for the virtual machine requirements. If you can look further down in this document, you can see these are some of the samples of the .ova, as you can see right there. From the naming convention standpoints, these are the equivalent physical appliances, like this one right here is 3615 or the 55, and the value right behind it, that's the size of the disk space, right? This guy has 300 gig, this one is 600, and that's 1.2 terabyte. If you look at this table right here, you can see the list of requirements for the CPU, memory, and disk space perspective. For the CPU, you can see if you are dealing with the small in this case is the 3615, the medium is the 55, and the large is the 95, just FYI. You see that the Cisco recommend having 16, 24, and 24 CPUs for those respective appliances. There's also little notes right here that the number of the core right here is twice of those that you find in the physical appliance because of the hyper-threading. So just FYI on those. From the memory perspective, if you just do the eval, you only need the 16 gig, but for the small, you need 32, then 96, and the large, you need the 256 gig. From the hard disk perspective, the eval, I'm not sure if this is still true. I believe the new OVA now requires 300, but anyway, it shows 200 right here. But again, it will be controlled by the OVA that you download, so you don't have to worry about it as much. Just say that you need 300. So you can see from production, 300 up to 2.4 terabyte disk storage, and that depends on the deployments and the tasks of the ISE nodes. So this will give you a general ideas of what a given size ISE VM would require from the resource perspective. And you can read through this. There's a storage and file system requirement, disk controller, and the NIC, which supports both E1000 and VMX-Net3. There's also an equivalent table for the Linux KVM, as well as the Hyper-V, which are the hypervisor. They are supported by the ISE VM. And there's some recommendation you can read through as well, coming all the way down to the disk space requirement, which is as important. And you can see based on the persona on an ISE node, from the standalone to the distributed to the dedicated admin monitoring, PSN, PXGrid, or a co-located admin monitoring. You can see the minimum disk size is 200. For the eval, I guess for eval 200 is okay. And then for the production, these are the minimum disks, which would have been dictated by the OVA. But if you deal with the monitoring node, then you might want to pay a little bit of attention as far as the additional disk space that you may need, and this will depend on the lock retention, which is, again, there's a table down below that will give you some guidelines as far as how number of endpoints that you have, and given a disk size, how long you can expect the lock to be kept. I believe this is in a number of days. And again, this is the guideline, it's not a hard rule or anything. And you can see that for the monitoring node, there's an option to increase the disk size all the way up to 2.4 terabyte. Okay, maximum disk space 2.4. I would say that for the monitoring node in particular, if you can spare additional disk space, you might want to, especially in the larger deployment, give it a maximum if you can. All right, so make sure you kind of familiarize yourself with the VM requirements, even though the resources, like I said, are defined in the OVA. It is not a bad idea to get some idea of the requirements so you can correctly communicate that to your VMware admin. All right, so now let's move on to our lab. Let me close that out. Before we get into the installation part of the lab, let's take a quick review of our lab setup. Here we have our ISE, our Identity Services Engine, ISE1 or LM-ISE1 that I have already prepped and installed, right, ready to go. It's a fresh install, so we haven't really done any kind of configuration, just the initial initialization that we went through. What we're going to be doing in this lab is to go through an installation of ISE number 2 right here with the IP address of 172.16.32.103. And by the way, the ISE 1 has the IPF.102, right? And that's on the VLAN 32, which is our server VLAN. And the server that we also have that VLAN, which is our Windows 2019 domain controller. Right? And also it's going to act as the NS server that we use as part of our ISE installation that has the IP of 32.40. We have a core switch, switch 1, that has a loopback IP of 172.16.0.1. It's running NTP service, so we'll use it as our NTP server as well. Then it has connections to an internet, so if our ISE needs to reach out to an internet for anything, then we'll be able to do that. All right, pretty straightforward setup here. There are some prerequisites that you need to take care of before you can begin the installation. First, you need to have a functioning VMware ESXi running version 5.1 update 2 or 6.x at minimum. For us, let me bring up the jump host, which is our Windows 2019 over here that we use as a jump box. We are actually running, I believe it's a version, I'll tell you in a second, 6.update 3, so it's pretty recent. Okay, and that's what we're going to use for the lab. Then you need to download the ISE 3.0 software, either in an ISO or OVA, with OVA being preferable. ISO, usually you use that for your physical appliances. All right, so if you deal with the physical appliance, then the ISE should come with the pre-install version, but for whatever reason you need to reinstall from scratch, maybe the version that comes with is older than what you want or different than what you want, then you would need to get the ISO file mounted on the virtual DVD on the UCS CIMC and then perform the installation that way. Right? Otherwise, for the virtual appliances, it's recommended to download one of the OVA files and then make sure that you deployed it from the computer that has the high-speed LAN connection to the ESXi server, as you're going to be uploading. What's the latest file size right now? Let's take a look. Like for the 3.0 OVA, yep, we are in the range of 15 gig, and that's where you're going to be pushing it real time during the installation from your machine to your ESXi server. All right, so make sure you have a good connection there. As you can see from this ISE software download page for the 3.0, there are many choices of OVA to choose from, and we can take a look at what's available. Right, the first one right at the top right here, which is 300 gig in the disk size, and you can see that it tells you even that it's recommended to be used for eval small and medium size appliance. And this is the one that we're going to be using in the lab. Okay, so if you have an ISE node that needs to run, whether it's PXN or PXGrid, I recommend it. You can use this file right there. That's equivalent to the 15 or the 55. The next one up has a bigger disk size, which is 600 gig, and this is recommended for the admin and monitoring node. Okay, just because I have the larger disk size, and as I mentioned earlier, even though it comes with 600, with the monitoring node, you might want to increase that if you need to keep the log longer. And then for the 3655 or the 95 equivalents of the large and the medium, or the medium and large rather, which is recommended for the admin monitoring. Again, this one actually comes with the 1.2 terabyte. And then I guess if you go with the large one, the 95, right? And this one comes with a 2.4 terabyte of disk space. Right, so those are the OVAs that are available, and you can pretty much use any one of these that fits your ISE design. And then I just want to point out that there's a ISO file down below right here for a full installation. And this is for both the 3500 and the 3600 model appliances. And one thing to notice is that the size of the ISO is actually almost half the size of the OVA. Again, one last thing, I cannot stress enough how important it is to have a proper disk space from day one, as ISE does not support disk resizing or expansion, and you would need to go through a fresh install to correct that with the bigger disk space. You're also going to need some ISE VM licenses, and as of version 2.4, you actually need the VM license with the correct size, whether it's small, medium, or large. Right? Instead, a generic VM license in the previous release. And we'll talk more about that later when we get to the licensing discussion. Then you need a DNS server with an A record of ISE created, the FQDN, which you will be using our Windows 2019 for in this case. You're going to need an NTP server that is reachable at the time of installation, and that's going to be our switch 1 loopback as well as the gateway IP address. Again, it's going to be switch 1, the .1 IP right there. All of these should be reachable because as we go through the installation, we'll see they actually perform the reachability check. Make sure that the virtualization technology, or VT, is enabled, and this is usually done under the BIOS of your compute. Right? And one way to check whether or not it's enabled, you can SSH into the ESXi. Let me do that real quick, just to show you. Oh, looks like I don't have SSH enabled right there, so let me do that real quick. Right here, go ahead and start that. And let me just restart the session. There you go. Log in. And then the command that you want is esxcfg-info. And you can grep and look for the line that said HP support. Right there. If it says number 3, that means it's supported as well as it's being enabled. Let me go up. Yep, number 3 right there. If it shows it's number 2, it means it's your compute supports it, but it is disabled, in which case you have to go under the BIOS and then enable the virtualization technology. Right, just FYI on that. And then lastly, if you plan to do any kind of span-based probe, you need to enable promiscuous settings on the vSwitch that the ISE port is connected to. Right, and just FYI, the promiscuous setting is done under the switch, or actually you can do it, I believe, at the port group level as well, but let me show you at the switch level. So right there, if you go to, I guess, edit settings, security, and you can see right there, promiscuous mode, you need to change that from reject to accept. Since we don't plan to do any kind of span-based probe, we don't really need it. But again, just FYI on that. Now let's begin our installation of the VM. As you can see right here, I already have the LM-ISE1 up and running. To save us some time, I already did the initial VM creation for the ISE2, so we don't have to be sitting here waiting for that part to be done. What I'm going to show you is how to create the VM, and then we're going to continue with the node that I've already created. All right, so to create the ISE VM, go ahead and click Create. The register virtual machine. And by the way, I'm just using the OnBox, the VM web client here. If you are using a vCenter, it might look a little different, but the process should be very similar. We're going to use the OVF OVA file right here. Click Next. The name, I'm just going to say this is going to be LM-ISE2. And then we need to select a drag and drop no VA. I have a folder right here. Let me show you. I've already downloaded the eval one, which is the 3615.55.300. I'm just going to go ahead and simply drag that over. There you go. It's just a single file, 15 gig. Select the appropriate storage. Select the network that the NIC is going to be mapped into. For us, it's VLAN 32 server right there. Deployment type, you can see the OVA. This one in particular supports the eval small and medium, just like the descriptions on the download page. We're going to stick with the eval, and then whatever you selected, you will see that there's a note down below that says it's going to need 4 virtual CPU as well as 16 gig of memory. For disk provisioning, even though the thin provision is enabled in production, definitely if you can afford to reserve the disk storage, it is recommended to choose the thick. For us in the lab, we're going to leave it as thin, and we're not going to worry about powering on because this is just to give you an idea of how to create a VM. I'm not even going to click finish here because when I do that, it's basically going to go through and download the OVA file. That's going to take some time, and that's going to end up being the LM-ISE2 that I already have. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel this, but that's the process of creating the VM. If you are running, just FYI, the older version of ESXi 6.5, there was a known issue deploying ISE OVA. Although you may or may not run into that, it might get fixed in a later release. But if you do, then you need to use the OVF tool to perform the deployment instead. And we actually ran into this or show you this back in our ISE 2.2 VM installation video. So if you need more information, you want to check that out. Right now that the VM is created, I'm just going to continue with the LM-ISE2 that I already have. Let's do a quick review. You can see for guest OS perspective, it's a Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7, 64-bit. It comes with the VMware tool install. It has 4 CPU and 16 gig of memory, just the description set. We can take a look. Let me click edit on those. Yep, same deal, 4 CPU. Although one thing I find interesting is that for some reason this one doesn't come with the resource reservation as I believe it should. At least that's how it was in the previous version, so that might still need to be fixed, I would say. So if you looked under the CPU and you do not see any kind of reservation, you definitely want to do that, especially again in the production. Okay, so in the reservation, because we have 4 core of CPU, you might set 4,000. You just have to do your calculation and make sure you do the correct reservation there. Okay, we're not going to do that in our lab. The same thing with the memory, 16 gig. There's no reservations. You might want to come in here and set, in our case, 16 gig and reserve that as a base practice. From the hard disk space is 300 gig. We chose thin provision, so that's what we got. And then even though when we did the install, it only showed up as one, I guess it didn't show up as an adapter, it just said choose a network. So whatever network that you chose, or the port group, it gets assigned to all of the 6 virtual adapter on the VM, as you can see, 1 through 6. And we selected VLAN 32. Okay, and it looks like the OVA is using the E1000 adapter type. Okay, so that's what the configuration of an ISE VM looks like. In our case, it's the eval, or I guess the small, medium 3615.55 with 300 gig disk space. Okay, I'm going to cancel out of that, and now I'm going to go ahead and start the VM. Let's go ahead and open the console. Give it a few seconds here. With the OVA, it shouldn't take too long to boot up, unlike the ISO. You can see it's probably within a minute here, and now we get a setup prompt. To go through a setup, you type setup for login, and then go ahead and just kind of move down to the bottom of the screen there. The first thing that you need to provide is the host name of the server. For us is LM-ISE2. And hopefully you already have all these information handy. IP address for us is 172.16.32.103. Again, just make sure you double check, make sure there's no typo before hitting enter, because once you make that mistake, it's cumbersome to come back and fix it. So 172.16.32.103 there. Net mask 255.255.255.0 for us, /24. For a default gateway, 32.1. We're not going to deal with IPv6, although it is supported. For the domain name, okay, we're going to do ice.labminutes.com. Even though our main domain name is labminutes.com, we have decided to put this ISE in a subdomain, which is a subdomain ISE, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the certificate installation. There's a good reason why you might want to do this. Go ahead, hit enter. For the name server, 172.16.32.40, which is our domain controller. For the name server, we do not have a secondary name server, so skip that. For NTP, it's our switch loopback 16.01. And we're not going to add, just have one NTP server there. For time zone, for us is US/Pacific. We definitely want to enable SSH for remote access. And then this is where you provide username and password by default as admin. No need to change that. And then provide the password. So you can see that ISE is in the process of bringing up network and interface now. In a second, it's going to try to reach out. First default gateway, right? Then the DNS server as well as the NTP server. So give that a second, and the message will show that as well. You can see right there, pinging the gateway. Yep, and then also ping the primary name server and go through the disk IO's performance testing, and then show you the test result of the writing and the reading. Yep, and at the end, right, it will show whether or not the performance actually meets the performance guideline. Right, in our case, it definitely is supported. And at this point, once you see this message right here, ISE is just going to continue with the installation. So there's not much that you need to do depending on how powerful your server is. Right, the time that it takes for the installation to complete might vary. Usually, it should complete within an hour. So for us, what we're going to do is to switch gear while this thing is happening in the background. We are now going to be talking about licensing while we're waiting for the installation to finish. One of the biggest changes in ISE 3.0 is around licensing. We kind of went through this license transformation in, I believe, late version of 1.x. But now, in order to align with Cisco DNA licensing, I guess Cisco has once again redone the ISE licensing. If you are already familiar with the ISE 2.x, you know that the core ISE licenses are Base Plus and Apex. And we kind of covered that pretty extensively back in our ISE 2.2 video. And just to aid my explanation, let me bring up some visual for you. So here, this is a table that I've created to provide a quick comparison between the ISE 2.x and the 3.0. This is the same table pretty much that we used back in the ISE 2.2 video series. And the major changes, other than the fact that the licensing are now called Essential, Advantage, and Premier as opposed to Base Plus and Apex. Let me point some of those out for you. First of all, they become what they call a tier licenses, meaning that the higher tier, in this case, the highest tier is Premier, even though I have it kind of upside down. The Premier, which is the higher tier, licenses includes all of the features from the lower tiers. All right, unlike the Base, the Plus, and the Apex, where each kind of provides their own certain sets of features. So in this case, for example, Essential being the lowest tier. So when you get Essential, you get all these features. But when you buy the Advantage, you get all these features in addition to everything in Essential. And then for the Premier, you get everything in this table, right? I guess I shouldn't say the table, but Essential plus the Advantage. So that is the first key difference. The second is the fact that the base perpetual has now become Essential subscription. As you can see right there under the term column, base used to be perpetual, but moving forward, the Essential will become a subscription-based license. There are also some features that gets moved around between the tier, and I kind of have it highlighted them here. Right, so just to make the reference a little bit easier, I've color-coded it. For example, the TrustSec that used to be available in the base and now has been moved into Advantage. And the passive ID that used to be in the plus is now moved to the Essential. And then the more advanced security, I would say, or at least as what Cisco consider advanced security, which are the Adaptive Network Control, ANC, as well as the Rapid Threat Containment. Those has been moved under the Premier. Everything else in the table kind of remains the same, but let's go through them in more detail anyway. First of all, ISE by default comes with 90-day evaluation right out of the box. It's nothing that you have to do. You don't have to contact Cisco or anything, as you will see in a second in our lab as well. Once it's installed, you get 90 days for you to play with all the features available. Unless you plan to continue to use the eval license for testing purposes in your lab, you will need to purchase proper licenses, and these depends on the features that you plan to use in your deployment. And here are the detailed breakdown of the ISE licenses. For the Essential license, and again, like I said, this is equivalent to the legacy base. Now we call the Base Plus license the legacy license. This is the license that will enable the basic ISE features functionality for user visibility as well as the enforcement. And this includes the basic AAA.1x, guest services, passive ID, although it's not clear on the Cisco documentation right now, but I believe the MACsec and the ISE API is still included under the Essential. You can purchase Essential in a 1, 3, or 5-year subscription. The way that the license is consumed is based on the concurrent radius session. So to figure out how many licenses that you need, you will need to know the expected maximum number of endpoints you expect to be authenticated and connected to your network at a time, because it's based on concurrent session. And this is not by the total number of the endpoints you have. Okay, just because let's say you have 5,000 PCs doesn't mean that all 5,000 connects and be online at the same time and seen by ISE. So the number is usually lower than that. I say the endpoints because this can be either user endpoint like computer, the mobile device, or a non-user endpoint like printers, access point, IP phone, and you name it, right? Especially the IoT devices. That tends to stay on 24/7. So take those into consideration. Then for the Advantage license that you will get, and that's equivalent of the base and the plus combined, right? If you need to implement a feature like Cisco PX Grid, the profiling and feed, TrustSec, MSC integration for location services, BYOD, and I believe the ACI integration is still there too, then you're going to need to purchase the Advantage license. And again, like I mentioned, you get everything from the Essential as well. So it's all inclusive of Essential. Unlike the base and the plus, you do not need to purchase Essential in order to use the Advantage feature. With the base and the plus has a dependency on the base, but that is no longer the case for the Advantage. Right, which means that the radius session that matches the Advantage features based on the authorization policy rule will consume the Advantage license. Right, and that's based on one of these features that you turn on in the authorization policy rule. One of the popular features that requires an Advantage is profiling, I would say. Right, because if you plan to authenticate your non-user devices based on the device type, like an IP phone, for example, the chances are the device will be online all the time and always consume the Advantage license. So you have to account for that for the entire time, unlike the user device that can come and go. So make sure that you account for these endpoints appropriately, the non-user endpoint. Same deal for the subscription terms, 1, 3, or 5 years. For the Premier license, which is equivalent to Base, Plus, and Apex combined, it gives you the more advanced enforcement feature set, I would say, and they are the Rapid Threat Containment, Adaptive Network Control, the Posture Assessment, the MDM integration, and the Threat-Centric NAC. Premier is inclusive of Essential and Advantage and has the same subscription term, 1, 3, and 5. So one clarification that I want to make is that these licenses are not mutually exclusive. Right? Just because you purchase a Premier doesn't mean that you cannot have the Essential or the Advantage. And you can have them all pretty much installed on your ISE deployment in varying quantity based on your authentication needs. Right? The calculation is just going to be a little different since each license tier is pretty much self-contained. So if you have, for example, an endpoint that consumes a Premier, that endpoint would not consume Advantage or Essential, right? Unlike the legacy license where an endpoint that consumed the Apex also potentially consume Plus and Base at the same time, depending on if they use combined feature or not. But since the Premier already contained the feature from the Essential and the Advantage, it only consumed Premier. Moving down the table a little bit, AnyConnect license does not really fall under ISE license, so it is often overlooked. You need AnyConnect Apex if you plan to use posture assessment features, and I don't believe this has changed with ISE 3.0, although it wouldn't surprise me if Cisco also rebrand the AnyConnect Apex into a Premier or something tomorrow. Again, just to line up with the DNA licensing scheme. The license basically entitles you to use the AnyConnect VPN client with the ISE posture module when you want to do posture assessment specifically using ISE. If you already have purchased AnyConnect Apex as part of your existing AnyConnect VPN deployment, then you are good to go. Otherwise, you also need to purchase this license as part of your ISE licensing order. Right? But for this, just because the license may change, definitely check the latest licensing guide to make sure that there's no new changes to this. So these are what I considered ISE core licenses. There are also other ISE licenses available which you may or may not need. And the next one is the TACX, and just the name suggests it's for TACX features. And FYI, this license has been renamed from Device Administration or Device Admin, and now it's become TACX, I guess just to make it a little bit more obvious. If you want to enable TACX support, and by the way, it is also perpetual, so that's a good thing. That doesn't change from the previous version. As you see there, it remains perpetual. But unlike the ACS license, if you are migrating from the ACS that requires a large license, when you exceed the 500 devices, ISE doesn't have that concept. So you can pretty much have as many devices you want as part of the TACX authentication. It will be all covered just under the TACX license. You need one TACX license per ISE node that you plan to have the device admin service enable. What this means is if you have a brand new ISE deployment now with the 2 TACX node, then you will need 2 of these licenses. Right, this concept of per node licensing was introduced back in ISE 2.4, where prior to that, you only need to buy 1 device admin license for the entire deployment, regardless of how many ISE nodes are running TACX. But if you are upgrading from a version prior to 2.4 and already have device admin license, and this is also true if you go from anything prior to 2.4 to anything after 2.4, so that includes 2.4, 2.6, 2.7, not just the 3.0. Right, if you are migrating, then what you can do is to reach out to Cisco if you already have purchased the device admin license and have them honor the per deployment support by giving you, I believe it's a 50, last I checked, device admin license, and that's basically covers as many as the ISE node you can have in a deployment. Right, so that should be plenty. Then we have the IPsec license, and that's for when you want to secure communication between the PSN and the network access device using IPsec. Then you need this per PSN for up to 150 tunnels for each PSN. I personally don't come across this usage for this a lot, so I wouldn't imagine it being very common, but just FYI, that is also available. I am not going to cover the ISE PIC or PIC upgrade, as I don't even see them available in a 3.0 anymore, at least in the FCS. So you can see right there, I leave them blank. There's a good chance that the PIC or ISE PIC will no longer be supported in 3.0. Right? But just FYI, if you're in the 2.x, then there's an equivalent or the corresponding licenses right there. Evaluation we have already covered. You get 90 days up to 100 endpoints with all the features available. And then lastly, the virtual machine. So if you decide to go with the VM appliance like we do in this lab, you're also going to need to buy the VM license. Prior to 2.4, this was just a generic license that can be used for any size VM, but as of 2.4 and continue into 3.0, this has become size specific, being small, medium, and large, which maps to the physical appliance size of the 3615, 55, and 95 respectively. So if you have a new deployment now, and again, it's not just applicable to 3.0, it's actually started in 2.4, so anything 2.4, 2.6, 2.7, you're going to need to purchase or procure somehow the license with the correct size. If you, again, upgrading from the version prior to 2.4, you can reach out to Cisco, and Cisco will basically convert those licenses you already have into a medium-sized VM for you. Okay, and that's because the chances are you're not going to have the large size, because the large size or the 3695 just got introduced, I believe, after 2.4. So now let's talk about how you can buy these licenses. For a brand new implementation, you have a few ways to get these licenses. Number one, you can buy them separately at the quantity of your choosing. So you need to figure out how many of the licenses do you need for whether it's Essential, Advantage, or Premier, and just buy them a la carte. Option number two, if you buy Cisco Catalyst switches or wireless access point with DNA subscription, they may also comes with some core licenses already, and I'm not going to name them just because it can change anytime. Just check the latest ordering guide for those from the type of licenses you would get, as well as the quantity for each switch or AP that you purchase. But you're only going to get the Essential, Advantage, or Premier though for the most part. Everything else down below, you're still going to need to purchase them separately. Again, you want to check with Cisco for their latest offerings. And the last option, which is increasing in popularity, is you to go with the enterprise agreement, and that basically gives you everything. Okay, so everything that you see here, if your company is assigned the EA with Cisco, then you will have access to all these licenses. Now for the brownfield, where it can get a little bit more complicated, if you are upgrading from 2.x that already use smart licensing, then what you need to do is to perform a license conversion on your smart account before you perform the ISE server upgrade, right? And then you probably going to end up having to re-register ISE also to your smart account after the upgrade. But if you are upgrading from the 2.x and still uses the traditional licenses, which means that when you install the license originally, use the pack file as opposed to register your ISE to the smart license server, because 3.0 requires smart license, you're first going to need to convert your legacy licenses or traditional licenses to smart license, and then follow the same procedure as the previous scenario, which is performing the license conversion on your smart account. Because 3.0 is so new, it's literally, I would say, 2 weeks old at the time of this recording. I can't even tell you what the process looks like exactly, or how the legacy licenses gets mapped to the new licenses in terms of quantity. So you might want to reach out to your Cisco account team or support to get more information on that. So a couple of recommendations I have for you guys. Overall, I would recommend you always get some Premier license. It used to be Apex, but now it becomes Premier, even though you may think that you do not need some of these features today. And the reason for that, because once you install either the Essential or the Advantage licenses, you may no longer have access to those features offered by the Premier. In fact, the menu options for those might not even be displayed on the GUI, so you will see like a chunk of menu missing when you don't have those license installed. So you can always buy a bare minimum also, which I believe is, if it's still 100, used to be 100 with the Plus and the Apex, you might want to check on the Advantage and the Premier. But the point is you can buy the bare minimum, and that way you always have the feature available if you need to test anything. And lastly, as a reminder, if you're upgrading from the 2.3 or older and has the device admin or VM licenses, then make sure to contact Cisco to get the migrated license beforehand and have them in your smart accounts, as ISE will generate license warning without them in 2.4 onwards. So to prevent getting the licensing warning, make sure you have all those ready to go in your smart account. For more information regarding the licensing and ordering, you can check out the Cisco ISE ordering guide as well as the ISE 3.0 license FAQ page on the Cisco website. All right, let's take a quick peek at where we are with the installation. Looks like it's still going on. So we're just going to continue with the topic of licensing. Now we're going to get into the license installation. Going back to the diagram that we have, as I said, I already have the ISE number 1 stood up and ready to go right now. So we're going to be doing now ISE license installation on that server, which is going to end up being our primary admin anyway. As I mentioned, ISE 3.0 only support smart licensing. So the prerequisite to a license install is that one, you need to have a smart account, right? And that's with your company. So if your company don't have that, you definitely want to sign up as a first step. But the chances are your company should have this already if you've been dealing with Cisco products. Then you need to make sure that your ISE licenses that you purchase has been loaded into your account, right? Because it doesn't help if you have a smart account but no licenses. And then the last thing is you need to make sure that your ISE has internet access so it can reach out to the smart licensing server. Now to get your ISE registered with the smart licensing server, first thing you need to do, bring up the web interface. Okay, you go to the Cisco Software Central, basically software.cisco.com, and then there's a link where you can select the smart licensing. Log in with your account, and hopefully you already have access to your company smart account, and you see the name of your company showing up on the upper right hand corner there. If you happen to have access to multiple smart license accounts, just make sure that the correct account is selected, especially if you are a Cisco partner and you have access to multiple customer smart accounts, or maybe your company just happened to have multiple smart accounts. Again, make sure that is selected correctly. In addition to selecting the correct account at the company level, you also want to make sure that you also select the correct virtual account. If your company have multiple virtual accounts, and hopefully one of those will be used for ISE, if it's not a default, then you want to select, like for us right here, we have one called default, one called LabMinutes, the other one called SD-WAN. I guess we have a separate one for SD-WAN there. But for us, we're just going to use a default. First, you need to generate a registration token. Click on the new token. For description, we're just going to say ISE. You can provide the expiration day. By default 30, but you can increase it all the way up to a year. And if you also want to limit the maximum number of views, you can do that too. We're not going to do that. And click Create Token. Pretty straightforward. And then copy that token right there, Control C. So you have that ready to go. Then you want to jump back to your ISE. Let me go ahead and log in first. And this is our ISE 1. Just FYI, you can tell based on the URL, lm-ISE1. Okay, let's go ahead and provide later on that. And we'll talk about the web interface and all that in a later video. For now, we're just going to jump ahead and get into administration and licensing. This is where you configured all of the ISE licenses. And you can see because we are running eval right now, it's saying that we have 90 days left on that. And it said Cisco Smart Licensing Evaluation. There's some UID details in there, where there's the PID, a product ID, the VID, or the serial number of our VM. To configure this, expand the registration detail. This is where you would enter the registration tokens. Go ahead and paste that. This is what we copied from our Smart Licensing server, our portal. Then you need to define connection method, which is how ISE is going to connect to the Smart License server, whether it's directly through a proxy or through a transport gateway. We are going to do a direct connection with HTTPS. Then you need to specify the type of licenses that you plan to use, so ISE can account for those. By default, Essential, Advantage, and Premiers are all checked. Let's go ahead and check Device Admin as well. For the virtual appliance, I guess they're all checked by default. You can't even change it, so we'll leave it that way. Yep, you can see right there, enable the features that you purchased so it can be tracked by the smart licensing. Go ahead and click registered. Confirm, and ISE will be spinning right here. It's just a matter of time. Give it a couple minutes here. ISE will reach out to the server and register it. And just FYI, you only need to register the primary node for the most part, although I've seen where you might need to renew the registration after adding subsequent ISE nodes, but otherwise everything is being controlled from the primary admin node. It looks like the registration is done. One way to check that is to get back to your Smart License account, jump over to the product instances page, and hopefully we'll see right here, our LM-ISE1, that we just registered. Okay, going back to our ISE portal, you can see right there at the top, you have an option to either renew the registration or deregister the server. Right down below, you see a table that keeps track of the license consumption from Essential, Advantage, Premier, Device Admin, as well as the VM licenses. You can see there's a count of 1 right now under the VM small because we're running the eval and the spec of our VM matches the size VM small. That's why we get a count of 1. From this point onward, ISE will collect license consumption every 30 minutes and report the peak usage back to the Smart License server every day. Okay, just keep in mind the statistic that you see here is not real time, right? But that's based on the collection interval. So ISE will show the consumption stat based on the consumption counts. If you have any out of compliance, it keeps the number of day counts and the last time it was authorized. And whether or not, most importantly, you're in compliance. Assuming that you have purchased correct type with the sufficient quantities for the license at this point, your ISE should be properly licensed. Now to finish off our lab, let's jump back and see where we are with installation. Looks like that is pretty much done. While we can lock in using the console, I'm going to do is to use SSH instead just to get a bigger font for you guys. Just going to bring up, since we enable SSH during the initialization wizard, connect to ISE number 2 because it's the first time. The PuTTY asks for you to accept the key, and then go ahead and log in using the credential that you provide during the installation. Let's do a quick show run and review some of the default configuration. From the top, you got the host name, you got the IP domain name that we provided, ise.labminutes.com, the IP address of the Gigabit Ethernet 0, which is the primary interface that ISE uses. There's nothing under 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, then they're all actually remain shut down. The name server that we provide, 32.40, the default gateway, the time zone, NTP server, all the configurations are there, the username, password. Looks like by default, it allows MAC access a session of 5. Some password policies there, locking level, CDP, ICMP being allowed. Just to check and see if we have reachability to our network, we can ping the internet 8888. See if that works. Yep, you see we get the reply back there. Let's see if we can ping itself, meaning that it has a DNS record. So LM ISE2, ISE.labminutes.com. Yep, that is pingable. We can try to ping ISE1 as well, just to see if it can talk to its neighbor. Yep, and that's working. And finally, let's try to ping a Cisco.com. And we kind of know that's working just because we just went through the smart license registration, and obviously that requires a working internet connection. So now let me bring up a web interface and trying to get in there. You can see I have a bookmark there for LM-ISE2. Go ahead and log in. And this is going to be your first time logging into this particular ISE node. I guess the same thing as we saw earlier when we logged into ISE number 1. If you want to enable the Smart Call Home telemetry, you can provide the Cisco.com ID. Well, we're just going to bypass that and do later. Click Next. A little warning as far as we're still running the eval license, which we have 90 days. And it tells you that use the smart license to basically register ISE and pull down the licenses. Okay, go accept and close. And there you go. We just basically complete our installation of our ISE node number 2. The last thing I want to do here is to deregister our ISE1 from the smart account because we are going to continue the rest of our lab using the eval license. I'm going to go ahead and deregister. Okay, and there you go. We're back to having the 89 days remaining. With all the licenses there, I can see that the section for the VM licenses disappear, and we're back to just the core licenses and the device admin. All right. So the process of installing ISE VM hasn't really changed from the previous version, and it is pretty straightforward as long as you meet the hardware requirements and you have all the network parameters ready at the beginning for the initialization wizard. ISE licensing, on the other hand, can be confusing. So if you are unsure, you may want to engage a local authorized partner to help you navigate the licensing. One last note I want to make is that unlike the previous ISE version where ISE only generate warning when the license is out of compliance, in 3.0, you have 45-day grace periods before losing GUI access. Just keep that in mind and make sure that you not get into that state for longer than 45 days. Now that we have two freshly installed ISE nodes, we are ready to move into the next lab. And that wraps up our video on ISE 3.0 VMware installation and licensing. You can visit our website to view an extensive list of our lab videos and sign up to get access to additional lab contents. Thank you for watching LabMinutes.com, and I'll see you guys in the next video.